In a small village surrounded by hills and vast fields, there lived a man named Lucio. He was the village's water carrier, a simple but essential role as the nearest water source was a long walk down the hill, where a river meandered. Lucio dedicated himself to his work diligently and carried his wooden buckets attached to a stick that he supported on his shoulders, carefully balancing a bucket on each end. Residents trusted Lucio to ensure that their homes and gardens had the water they needed every day. He woke up before sunrise and with firm steps began the descent to the river. But there was one detail: one of his buckets had a crack. When Lucio filled both buckets in the river, he knew that on the way back the cracked bucket would let some of the water drain away. Upon arriving at the village, one of the buckets was always full, but the other only carried half the water it had filled. Although he knew that the cracked bucket meant more travel and effort, Lucio did not have the resources to buy a new bucket and tried to ignore the inconvenience, but over time the situation began to weigh on his conscience. He felt like he was failing at his job. As the days went by, the crack in the bucket began to bother Lucio more and more. He watched the drops trickling along the path and felt a growing frustration. With each drop that fell, it was as if he were failing the village. He thought to himself, "If only I had a new bucket, I could carry more water and do my job better. But like this, I'm always bringing less than I should." People of the village thanked Lucio for his work, but he felt unable to accept the praise. If they only knew, he thought, they would be disappointed to learn that half the water is lost on the way. It was an emotional burden he carried silently, and over time this anguish grew, making each trip to the river heavier. Every night, Lucio sat in front of his humble house, staring at the cracked bucket with a mixture of resignation and sadness. He began to wonder whether he should continue with the work. Perhaps it would be better to stop and find another way to help the village, something that wouldn't make him feel so inadequate. It was during one of these nights of reflection that a young man from the village named Tiago found him sitting deep in thought. Tiago was a curious and observant young man, and he noticed Lucio's dejected expression. He approached and gently asked, "Mr. Lucio, what worries you? Is everything all right?" First, Lucio hesitated to answer. He didn't want to share his secret, but Tiago's sincere concern touched him. After a pause, he opened up. "Tiago, every day I carry water to the village, but one of my buckets has a crack. With each trip, part of the water is lost along the way, and I feel like I'm not doing my job properly. It feels like I'm failing everyone, even though I don't mean to." Tiago listened attentively and, after reflecting for a moment, suggested, "Mr. Lucio, tomorrow when you return from the river, observe the side of the path where the water usually spills. Maybe you'll discover something you never noticed before." Lucio was intrigued but agreed to try. The next morning, Lucio woke up determined to follow Tiago's advice. He grabbed his buckets as usual and walked to the river, feeling the cool breeze and listening to the birdsong. Upon arriving, he filled the buckets with water and began the journey back to the village, but this time his eyes were focused on the ground on the side where the cracked bucket leaked. To his surprise, he noticed that the soil on that side was greener and full of life. Small wildflowers had sprouted along the path, forming a colorful strip that contrasted with the rest of the trail. There were violets, daisies, and other smaller flowers that danced in the wind, creating an unexpected landscape. Lucio was astonished to realize that where the water leaked from the bucket, life appeared. Each drop that fell nourished the soil, allowing the flowers to grow and spread. The beauty of the colors and the soft fragrance of the flowers filled the air, and he couldn't help but smile. Something he had always considered a flaw had, in fact, transformed the path into a hidden garden, something he had never noticed in all his days of work. When he arrived at the village, Lucio sought out Tiago, eager to share his discovery. Upon seeing him, he excitedly explained what he had noticed and how it had touched his heart. Tiago smiled and said, "Mr. Lucio, perhaps what we see as flaws can bring beauty and value that we haven't yet recognized. Your imperfection helped transform the path into something everyone can admire and enjoy. Sometimes we don't need to be perfect to bring beauty to the world. We just need to be ourselves and understand that even our limitations can make a difference." Lucio listened attentively and felt something change within him. He realized that his work was more than just bringing water to the village. Unintentionally, he had cultivated a path of flowers that brought joy and color to the villagers. In the days that followed, Lucio began to look at his work with new eyes. As he walked the path to the river and back to the village, he no longer minded the drops that escaped from the cracked bucket. On the contrary, he felt proud of each drop that fell, knowing they were nourishing the flowers that now beautified the path. The villagers started to notice the change in Lucio. He no longer wore a look of concern, and when he passed through the village, he always glanced at the flowered path with a sparkle in his eyes. Those flowers became part of the villagers' daily routine. They now gathered there to admire the beauty of the trail. Children played among the flowers, families stopped to rest and chat, and visitors came from other villages to see the flower path, as they came to call it. The flowers, without Lucio having planned it, became a symbol of hope and beauty for everyone. In a village that sometimes seemed immersed in the simplicity and fatigue of daily life, the flowered path offered a pause and a reminder that good things could come from the most unexpected places. One morning, an elderly woman from the village approached Lucio while he was carrying water back. She looked at him with a smile and said, "Lucio, we are all grateful for your work, but you have brought something even more special. This flowered path is a gift that brightens our hearts. You show us that life is made of simplicity, and that even in things that seem imperfect, there is a beauty that few can see." The elder's words deeply touched Lucio, and he felt a renewed sense of gratitude for his work and the opportunity to serve the village. He realized that he didn't need to be perfect to be useful, and that his imperfections had created something of value for everyone around him. Time passed, and the flower path became an indelible mark in the village. The flowers that Lucio, unknowingly, had sown continued to grow and spread across the hills around, creating a natural spectacle of colors and life that became more beautiful with each season. Water, which once seemed like a simple duty, was now seen with new eyes. Lucio, in turn, began to understand the true value of his work and the imperfections he carried. In fact, the crack in Lucio's bucket became a symbol of everyone's journey in life. We all, like the cracked bucket, carry our own flaws, doubts, and insecurities. However, it is often these flaws that teach us the most valuable lessons and help us contribute something more meaningful than we could ever imagine. Path Lucio walked every day with his cracked bucket was like the life of any human being, a balance between strength and fragility, success and failure, victories and losses. Lucio began to talk more with the villagers, sharing his reflections. He realized that many of them also felt like the cracked bucket. They felt like they were failing or not being enough. But over time, he started to show them that what seemed like a flaw was in fact a fundamental part of their journey, just like the flowers that bloomed along the path. "We all have our cracks, but it's because of them that we can make a difference," Lucio would say with a calm smile. "The water that is lost from my bucket helps bring life, and maybe our flaws can bring something good too, something we don't always see right away." The village transformed, not only because they now had more flowers, but because in each of its inhabitants there was a deeper understanding of self-acceptance and self-love. People began to realize that by accepting their imperfections, they could live more fully and offer the best of themselves to others, without fear of being judged or of failing. Lucio's cracked bucket became a living metaphor for everyone. And as the seasons changed and the flowers continued to grow, he felt deep in his heart that there was no longer any reason to feel inadequate. He no longer saw his imperfection as something to be fixed, but as an essential part of his story. On a sunny afternoon, after yet another long journey to the river, Lucio sat by the flowered path, looking with admiration at the flowers that bloomed. He realized that his life, just like the path, was filled with moments of beauty, even though he hadn't planned any of it. He smiled to himself, thinking that perhaps in the end what truly mattered wasn't the amount of water he carried, but the life he was helping to cultivate along the way. Moral of the story: it doesn't matter how imperfect or flawed we may consider ourselves, for it is these imperfections that can create something valuable, something beyond our expectations. True contribution to the world can come from where we least expect it, from our weaknesses, fears, and difficulties. Each of us has something unique to offer, and it is through our cracks that we can bring beauty, joy, and transformation to the world around us.